النبيين. السلام عليك يا ابن سيد الوصيين. السلام عليك يا ابن سيد المرسلين. السلام عليك يا ابن أمير المؤمنين. السلام عليك يا ابن فاطمة الزهراء سيدة النساء العالمين. السلام عليك يا أبا عبد الله. وأما بعد، السلام عليكم جميعا ورحمة الله. عزم Allah ujurana wa ujurukum. I'd like to extend a warm welcome to night 7 of 2021's Muharram program by Nabi Akram Islamic Center. To begin tonight's program, I would like to hand over to Brother Sayyid Ali Rais to enlighten our hearts with verses of the Holy Quran. Salli ala Muhammad wa ali Muhammad.
اللهم صل على محمد وآل محمد. أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. كل الطعام كان حلا لبني إسرائيل إلا ما حرم إسرائيل على نفسه إلا ما حرم إسرائيل على نفسه من قبل أن تنزل التوراة. قل فأتوا بالتوراة فاتلوها إن كنتم صادقين. فمن افترى على الله الكذب من بعد ذلك فأولئك هم الظالمون. قل صدق الله فاتبعوا ملة إبراهيم حنيفا وما كان من المشركين. إن أول بيت وضع للناس للذي ببكة مباركا وهدى للعالمين. فيه آيات بينات ومن دخله كان آمنا. ولله على الناس حج البيت من استطاع إليه سبيلا ومن كفر فإن الله غني عن العالمين قل يا أهل الكتاب والله شهيد قل يا أهل الكتاب لم تصدون عن سبيل الله من آمن تبغونها عوجا لم تصدون عن سبيل الله من آمن تبغونها عوجا وأنتم شهداء وما الله بغافل عما تعملون صدق الله العلي العظيم اللهم صل على محمد وآل محمد وعجل فرجهم.
Thank you very much, Brother Ali, for that beautiful recitation. May Allah bless you and grant you plenty of success in your life. For our viewers who can't actually see, Brother Ali is actually very young, even though you can't hear it in his voice. It's also a bit unfortunate that on his high pitches that Zoom actually cuts out the audio a little bit. So apologies to the audience for missing out on that, and apologies to you, Sayyid Ali, for that issue. Thank you very much once again. May Allah bless you. Salla ala Muhammad wa ali Muhammad. The discussion in the past few nights has revolved around the companions of Imam Hussein in Karbala and what we can learn from them and implement into our daily lives. Last night we discussed the youth of Karbala and how youth are portrayed in Islam and in culture, Eastern culture and Western culture. And we discussed, I guess, different roles, how roles communities can play, parents can play, and the youth themselves in order for us to be more accommodating for them, inshallah. The topic for tonight's discussion will be the prayer of Ashura and prayer in Islam. I won't take any more of your time. I'll hand over to our very esteemed speakers, His Eminence Sheikh Hamad Waqar, Sheikh Ali Safdari, and Sheikh Muhammad Dahaini. Salla ala Muhammad wa ali Muhammad.
اللهم صل على محمد وآل محمد.
اللهم صل على محمد وآل محمد.
أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. الحمد لله رب العالمين والصلاة والسلام على سيدنا ونبينا أبو القاسم محمد.
اللهم صل على محمد وآل محمد.
وعلى أهل بيته الطيبين الطاهرين المعصومين. Assalamu alaikum, brothers and sisters. As always, it's an honor to be here, especially in the presence of Sheikh Muhammad and Sheikh Ali Safdari. I wanted to ask Sheikh Ali Safdari, inshallah, to give us a few minutes to discuss some recent events that have been happening in Afghanistan over the last couple of days, because one of the aspects about Muharram and the movement of Imam Hussein alayhi salam is to be aware of our religious obligations, whether social or individual, and also to be aware of the plight of Muslims throughout the Muslim world. So it's very important for us to become aware of this situation. So please, Sheikh Ali Safdari, please help us to understand what's been happening over the last few days.
Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullah. Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. Azam Allahu ujurana wa ujurakum once again. Yeah, so unfortunately, as many of you may be aware, last night, the last city of Afghanistan, being the capital city, Kabul, unfortunately fell to the hands of Taliban, and this was essentially a conflict and turmoil that had been taking place for the past it's been over a few months, but taken its intensity in the last month, and over a period of few weeks, essentially they have swept over Afghanistan, have managed to take control. What I would like to say, just as a form of reassurance, is that the conflict has been minimal in all of these cities and all of these towns. In some cities, in some towns, there has been more conflict than others, but generally speaking, the Taliban have not invaded Afghanistan. They've just walked into the different cities, simply because there were arrangements and agreements made behind the scenes. The betrayal of the government, of commanders for whatever price they are getting paid. It reminds me of both Karbala and the time of Muawiyah, Imam Hassan. Nonetheless, this is the reality we are living with right now in Afghanistan. Taliban do not have a good history with the Afghan people. Over 20 years ago, they had about 90% control over Afghanistan, and they have left very negative and horrific memories in the minds of many people. Personally, myself and my family, we actually migrated to Iran during that time, and fate has brought us here now. But hopefully that history does not repeat itself. There have been signs from the group that they are willing to coexist with other factions, whether they are from the same religious denomination or not, which is a reassuring sign, at least for the Shia, because they have been victims of Taliban's extremism in the past, in the form of bombings and their direct intervention, like I said, 20 years ago. But it does not only stop with the Hazara community or the Shia community in Afghanistan. It extends to anyone who does not want to see barbarism and backward ways of implementing Islam in any nation or any denomination. So it's very hard to tell right now. Like I said, the good news right now is that there has been crimes committed against the people. Civilians have been hurt. Women and children have been hurt. We're not denying that. But generally speaking, they have given this impression that they are willing to rule over Afghanistan in the long term and wanting to be peaceful about that. So once again, hopefully that does happen. The coming week, the coming month will be very telling about their decisions, about how they actually intend to take on the situation, whether this was all a guise, a mask they had put on until they have come into full power, and then they will go back to their old ways. We pray that that does not happen, but bear in mind that the existing government was very corrupt as well. Safety and security and livelihood of the people was at all-time low. And this was due mainly to the division between the tribes. And inshallah, I mean, وَمَكَرُوا وَمَكَرَ اللَّهُ. We pray that the situation does improve. It is one thing to talk about it, you and I, in this part of the world, and it is another thing for the Afghan people in Afghanistan having to be reminded about the horror and the fear and the suffering of 20 years ago. So they are trying their best to stay composed. At the end of the day, since it's almost been half a century that Afghanistan has been in one form of a war or another. So they're really sick and tired of fighting, spilling blood, and they just want their safety ensured. So if this is something that can be ensured by a certain faction, then so be it. But let's keep them in our prayers. Let's hope that the situation only improves from here, and may Allah and the Ma'sumin be always watchful of their followers, of the Muslims and humanity in general. Let's, inshallah, recite a Fatiha in that regard. After salawat ala Muhammad wa ali Muhammad.
اللهم على محمد وآل محمد.
بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. الرحمن الرحيم.
And to continue along those lines, inshallah, we will ask Sheikh Mohammed Dahani for a couple minutes to describe the situation in Lebanon, inshallah.
بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. عظم الله أجوركم, brothers. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Thank you very much for that, Sheikh Ali. It's always a pleasure to be enlightened with the umur and the shu'un of the Muslimin around the world. And definitely it's one of the main causes and reasons behind the uprising and the revolution of Abu Abdullah al-Hussein anyway. You know, to make sure that, you know, there's always a clear distinction between right and wrong, haqq and batil, and trying to always, you know, become the greatest nation, you know. And, you know, you mentioned something, Sheikh Ali, about our brothers and our sisters in Afghanistan going, you know, through what they're going through. And inshallah, the coming days show that it's, you know, there's going to be good rather than bad. But, you know, I can't help but notice, you know, I was up all night, and I know a lot of my brothers and sisters around the world have been up all night and all day and for weeks, and about the situation in Lebanon, you know, like, you know, the trauma of what's happened with civil war or past wars in Lebanon. You see that it's real, and what's happening now with like the state of the government, the state of the country, it's at its worst it's ever been. Like, you know, the financial situation, the economical situation in Lebanon, you know, the government is just it's forgotten its people. The people are starving, they're hungry, there's no food, you know, there's a shortage of food, shortage of petrol, it's just the sanctions have been pressuring Lebanon. This is the most brutalist form of warfare you can think of, soft war, and just closing its people. And honestly, like, you know, it just breaks my heart just thinking I spent so much time in this country, you know, for a good 10 years of my life between Hausa and when I was younger. Just, you know, spent a lot of time in Lebanon and with the people of this great country. And it breaks my heart to see them like this, man. Like, you know, imagine it reaches a stage where there's no hospitals. Like, hospitals are closing down because they can't fund it. It's too hard. And, you know, living in the West today, where we are today in Australia and Sydney, of course, we have these, you know, these lockdowns. And I know that there's been a lot of talk over the past couple of weeks about these lockdowns and how uncomfortable they are and what they mean to our freedom. And, you know, most of it, you know, can be true, or whatever your argument is for or against. The reality is we still have it much better than others. Like, we should look at what's happening in Afghanistan and looking what's happening in Lebanon and Palestine and Yemen and all of these places where there's people that are really oppressed. And in the days of oppression, in the days of Muharram, thinking about the story of Imam Hussein alayhi salam and how they were oppressed, and trying to, like, we are just crying of the story of Imam Hussein alayhi salam, but there are people living it. There are people living thirst, living hunger, living poverty. And, you know, it's our duty. We have a moral duty, an Islamic duty, a human duty, just to, you know, whoever we can help, however we can help, minimize our spending, minimize our luxuries, minimize our coffees and our takeaways and our Uber and our, and just think about them. You know, when you're scrolling on Facebook and you see someone putting up a GoFundMe page for the people of Lebanon, and you say, oh, I just donated, or I just sent $50 or $100 or $200 to, still like $5, $10, any amount can go a long way for the people of our country. And the story of Imam Hussein alayhi salam, the platform of Abu Abdullah Hussein alayhi salam, is no greater platform than to think about our Muslim brothers and sisters around the world and remember him in our salat. And inshallah, tonight the discussion will be about this great topic. And the bare minimum we can do is keep him in our thoughts and keep him in our dua, and inshallah in our teas in the next coming nights. Thank you very much for giving me the time, and let's get this going.
Alhamdulillah, look, these are two prime examples of just suffering that exists in our Islamic lands that we need to be aware of, right? So one of the important aspects of Imam Hussein alayhi salam and his mission is to wake that up in us and to try our best to become aware of what's happening in the Muslim world. So it's good that we had those updates. Tonight, inshallah, we're going to be speaking about the prayer of Ashura and looking at prayer as well. And I just wanted to mention before I read about this prayer that last night, in the last few nights with Vivox, alhamdulillah, we've had a lot of amazing questions, and I highly encourage people to send your questions in, because I feel that that's one of the ways that these programs stand out, and it helps us to direct our discussion on what's on your minds, inshallah. So make sure we get some good questions. All right, so I'm going to read the story of the prayer that happened on the day of Ashura, the Zohar prayer in Ashura, from Maktel of Abdul Razak al-Mukarram. Okay, so in this account of the martyrdom of Imam Hussein and the tragic events, he puts the prayer after the shahadat of Hur ibn Yazid al-Riyahi, and he states, Al-Hussein alayhi salam stood to perform his prayers. It is said that he led the prayers before the survivors from among his companions. Obviously, he led the prayers and his companions were behind him. It was a special prayer called Salat al-Khawf, the prayer said by one fearing for his life. Now, I wanted to interject here and just mention a quick point. So, obviously, Salat al-Khawf is performed in times where one's life is in danger, and this was definitely one of those times. But if one's life is in imminent danger and performing the prayer in its normal form could end up in a loss of life or significant harm, then you don't have to perform prayer in that form. You don't even have to do Salat al-Khawf. You could pray it in your mind if that's how you have to do it, right? The fact that the Imam alayhi salam decided that prayer is going to be performed in congregation in this way. In some sources it says it was individual, but we'll go according to this, that prayer will be performed in this way, right? Shows the importance of this prayer and shows that in that orchestrated picture of shahadat that we've been discussing over these last few nights, this was an integral part, because it wasn't necessarily a religious obligation here. It was something that Imam Hussein alayhi salam wanted to stand out and wanted us to witness. And similar events happened in his father's life, Imam Ali alayhi salam, where he prayed, or he administered prayer on the battlefield as well. Okay, continuing. In front of him, in front of Imam Hussein alayhi salam, stood Zuhair ibn al-Qayn and Sa'id ibn Abdullah al-Hanafi, and half of the surviving companions. So they weren't the only two, there were others as well. When they pray, obviously the enemy shoots arrows. This isn't in the book, but many of these companions are struck. And then the book continues. When Sa'id's wounds became overwhelming, he fell on the ground as he was supplicating in this way. O Allah, curse them as you curse the peoples of Ad and Thamud, and convey my salam to your prophet, and tell him about the pain of the wounds which I have received. For I desired your rewards when I supported the offspring of your prophet, sallallahu alaihi wa alayhi. He turned to Imam Hussein alayhi salam and asks, have I carried out my obligation, Yabna Rasulullah, O son of the Messenger of Allah? Yes, says the Imam, and you shall reach paradise before I do. The hero then dies, Sa'id ibn Abdullah al-Hanafi. As many as 13 arrows were found planted in his body, in addition to the blows which he sustained beforehand from swords and lances. After the Imam finishes his prayers, he addresses his companions in this way. O honorable men, here is paradise, with its gates wide open for you, with its rivers joining one another, with its fruits ripened. And here is Rasulullah and the shuhada who were killed fi sabilillah, in the cause of Allah. They all are waiting for you to join them. They are congratulating one another on your account. So defend the religion of Allah and His Prophet and protect the women of Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam. They respond to him, may our lives be sacrificed for yours. May our blood protect yours. By Allah, so long as blood flows in our veins, no harm shall reach you or your women. And inshallah, from that, the fight continues, and their, shahadat, the door of shahadat obviously was open. But this prayer is one of the major events on the day of Ashura that stands out. It seems as if the Imam is teaching us about the importance of prayer, even in this, hardship and difficulty and, amazing situation. Right? What do you guys think of that?
That's emotional, powerful, man. شيخ علي تفضل حبيبي. الشيخ علي there?
He's on mute.
Okay.
Sorry about that. Yeah, it is quite interesting. The Imam took, it was in the account I was reading, they were, as you said as well, it was after a bit of fighting, and they decided to pray Jama'ah in this format. And I think one thing we're going to keep in mind with Imam Hussein's actions is we do this historical, we historically try to understand Imam Hussein's actions. We say he did this, so 1400 years later we could say prayer was important and things like that, which is a correct point, which you have mentioned. At the same time, I think a lot of his action were also for the immediate surrounding. When he goes on to pray, then people are seeing that, oh, there's salat happening. The fact that the salat was attacked was because Umar ibn Sa'ad and their elites, their commanders, they don't want the morale of their army to fall apart. This is how much salat has an influence, that it can, first of all, they already, we've got to be historically accurate here. A good portion of the army of Yazid are already finding it very difficult to face Imam Hussein. Sibtun Nabi is the grandson of the Prophet. So they've sold their iman, they've sold their religion for whatever there is to gain, and they've come and made this stance. And maybe most of them did not even predict, or at least some of them did not predict that it would lead to this. There are accounts, I think, which support this idea. Nonetheless, they were there and they didn't do anything better. Some of the likes of Hur did make a better decision. But Imam Hussein was still trying his very best to appeal to that crowd, to make something change in them, to tremble their hearts. And he did this on multiple occasions. One, I believe tonight we are doing the Musibah of Ali al-Asghar. Even that has that side benefit. He didn't do that necessarily to, he didn't put the life of Ali al-Asghar in danger so that the enemy could wake up. But it could, I mean, that could even be argued, but at least what we know from the apparent is that he went to quench the thirst of his infant 6 months. And a side effect of that would have been the army would be, and as they were, historical accounts has it, that the army was shaking. Like, you know, there were people like, wow, like this is the depths of evil we have come to, of apathy and complete recklessness we have come to. Now, the same thing goes with prayer. Prayer in the salat amududdin. Prayer is the pillar of religion and the pillar of the life of any person who is religious, right? And some of these people would have been, in one way or another, like to at least associate themselves with Islam. So Imam Hussein used salat to wake the people up, and I think that's symbolic, that we need to use salat to wake ourselves up. We need to there's a lot of symbolisms that can be drawn out from that one story, but I'll just leave it with that one point here.
Do you find it interesting that the people that were fighting Imam Hussein alayhi salam were also praying? And there were two camps praying on that day. They weren't praying together and they weren't praying at the same time, but they are of those who pray. They claim that they read Quran, they claim that they pray. So the fact that there were, you know, two camps, two armies that were head to head, and the army, one of them stops in the middle of war, stops in the middle of the whole context that Sheikh Hamad had just put together, and says Hayya ala salat. And it's very interesting that when Imam Hussein alayhi salam is approached and he asked, and it was in the middle of the war, and then one of his companions comes to him and tells him, Ya Abu Abdullah, it seems like it's prayer time. And he says, Adhakarta salat? He says, you remembered salat? He says, Ja'alak Allah min al-musallin. Imam Hussein alayhi salam. He tells him, may Allah Ta'ala bestow you upon those who upheld salat. And he's talking to who? To a companion of Imam Hussein, who is going to be a martyr, a shaheed, on the day of Ashura, in the ard of Karbala, of the highest companions, in the highest levels of martyrdom. And Imam Hussein alayhi salam is telling him, may Allah elevate you or put you with those, bestow you with those who upheld salat. So salat was critical. It was, and Imam Zain al-Abidin alayhi salam, it's narrated that in the Qasr of Ubaidullah, when they say, when I think it was Yazid, correct me if I'm wrong, if it's Yazid or Ubaidullah bin Ziyad, when he says, كيف ترى صنع الله بأبيك? And who won? Who won this war? And then the adhan gets on, and then Imam Zain al-Abidin says, look, can you hear the adhan? If you hear the adhan, that means we've won. So it was all about salat. It was all about this foundation, this amud, in qubila ma siwaha. If it's accepted and everything alongside it is accepted. Wa in rufida ma siwaha. And that's where you find the other camp, where your prayer is not accepted and nothing else you do will be accepted, because you're fighting the grandson of Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam. So what, the interesting thing that I'd want to pose to Sheikh Hamad, and maybe he can kick us off from there, is Sheikhna, what actions, number one, what type of salah is required of me? Like, how am I meant to meet this salah, approach it? And number two, what are the actions that should be side by side with my salah? Sheikh Hamad.
Yeah. So I think first the aspect that you mentioned where the camp of Imam Hussein alayhi salam was praying, and the army of Yazid was praying, right? And I think that's a really, really interesting point, because prayer, as we understand from our religious sources, is not just a ritual that we perform just for the fun of it, right? Prayer is supposed to have like a consequence, or it's supposed to lead to something, right? There's the whole notion as-salat tanha anil fahsha wal munkar, right? It's supposed to protect us or rid us of these negative actions. But the army of Yazid prayed and then killed the grandson of Rasulullah. It didn't stop them. It didn't prevent them from performing the worst deed possible. Right? What could have been worse?
Yeah.
Right? So obviously, not all prayer has that effect. And I know for myself, you guys, mashallah, probably won't be able to relate here, but I know for myself, I don't feel every time that I pray that my spirituality increases. Right? I know sometimes I'm just running through the prayer. I know sometimes that my mind might be in a million different places and I'm praying, but you know, what am I getting from this prayer? And this is a question I get all the time from people.
Yeah.
People always ask, you know, why don't I feel my prayer? What am I doing wrong? What do I need to do to increase the spiritual level of my prayer? And I think it's a great, like, it's a
question.
great picture to look at to address this question.
Yeah,
right?
100%.
And
Yeah.
I think that's something that we could definitely spend some time on. One of the aspects that I'll just, you know, mention the name of it, and then one of you guys could chime in and speak a little bit about it. But I think one of the essential elements of prayer, for prayer to be effective in the way that it's meant to be, is that hudur al-qalb, or that presence of the heart. And I think that presence of the heart, right, is pretty much everything when it comes to prayer. What do you guys think? Do you guys think that that's the key there? One of the keys, at least?
Definitely the key.
Yeah. Yeah, Maulai, I'm just, Hudur al-Qalb is just a really heavy word for me. In the sense that it's not the easiest thing to come by, right? Having presence of the heart. Now, what does that mean, really? Does that mean during every part of Salat you are thinking about Allah's magnificence and glory and what He's done for you? Or is there a more minimal level we can come to when it comes to Salat? I think it's, to be honest, taking all practicality into consideration, it's not easy praying with the presence of the heart. I feel like it's a difficult task in the way that that it's generally taught to us, that, you know, if someone was to depict to us the perfect salat, we'd probably have, you know, the riwayat of Imam Ali, you know, how he was in salat, he would go pale, or Imam Sajjad alayhi salam, he would go pale when he was taking wudu, and they would ask him, what's going on? You're just doing wudu. It's like, I'm getting ready to meet my Lord. That's hudur al-qalb in its full sense, right? But what's a minimal sense in which we can apply in our salat, and at the same time, it can have that important functionality of preventing us from fahsha wal munkar, preventing us from sinning and evil. So I think we can work backwards here. Okay, if we're trying to investigate what type of hudur al-qalb we need, what type of presence of the mind do we need, at what level, at what degree, then we need to come and look at the effect. We want salat we want salat to eventually help us restrain from sin, right? How is it going to do that? I want to like, that's the type of angle I want to go. I'll just finish with this.
Yeah.
If sinning is restraining, right, your mind comes into play. You know, sometimes they say tanha an al-fahsha'i wal munkar. The idea is, oh, well, you're remembered of God, therefore when you want to sin, you also remember God. Wait a minute. How many times have we sinned, and in the back of our minds, we're like, I know God is watching, right? It's not always the case that you're completely God unconscious when you're sinning. That happens, and that's referred to the state of ghafla. Like, you're completely ignorant of God in that stage and your responsibility, whether that be due to the influx of emotion, the scenario you're in. It's just an instinctive reaction. You couldn't even control it. You had no consciousness, right? But many a times we know it's a sin. Like, while it's happening, we know it's a sin. So it's not necessarily God consciousness that's helping us not sin. It's not that aspect of just remembering God that's helping us not sin. It seems to be something more inherent in the nature of salat itself. And I think it comes to the idea of restraining ourselves in the fact that ultimately we will be motivated to leave sinning if we have strong minds. And I think that's what salat is building. Salat is there to build a strong willpower, just a strong heart, a strong mind that can make those tough decisions. And I think there are many aspects of salat that help with that, but I'll pass it on to you, and
Wow.
Sheikh Ahmad, you can share some thoughts.
Wallah, Sheikh Ali, you opened so many doors in that a couple of minutes. Like, there's so many things to talk about. I'm going to try and tackle each one. So firstly, I'm going to try and use that concept that we usually we've been working with, which is reverse engineering the whole idea of salat in the first place. But before I get to that, it's the first question I'd ask is, can you or I be depressed and grateful at the exact same moment? That's a question. Just yes or no. Like right now, if you think about it, if you were in a very in a state where you're feeling so grateful about everything, you're grateful about your life, you're grateful about your surroundings, you're grateful about you're grateful about the blood that's running through your veins, you're grateful about the fact that you have curtains, you're grateful about so many things. In that state, in that moment, in that couple of minutes where you're focusing so much on what you have rather than what you don't, can you be in a depressed state? I think you can't. I don't see it possible. Most times when you're in a psychological or a mental down, when you're feeling down or you're going through a rough time, usually you tend to look at the negative side of things. It's the normal reaction, right? What salat comes to, from what I understand, is salat comes and tries to stabilize, Ahsan Sheikh, what you just mentioned, the mind. Throughout the day, there's so much information coming into your mind, so many different things that you're focusing on, so many different things that you're picking up on. Your subconscious mind's picking up on it, your conscious mind is picking up on it. That sort of creates who you are. It molds your personality. The experiences that you have, the memories that you have, the things that you focus on, they build who you are, right? So when Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala comes to us and He puts forward for us a spiritual blueprint, and the foundation of this spiritual blueprint, the usus of this spiritual blueprint, the mahwar and the radius and the circle and the pinpoint, the pinnacle of this spiritual blueprint is salat. Okay, then let's ask, why salat and what's its effect in its first place? Number one, it stabilizes the mind, because I can right now, if I have an issue with my arm or my leg, if I have a physical issue, I can go to a doctor. I can go to the people that have studied this field. If I have an issue with my car, I go to the person the manufacturer of my car. If I go to, if I want to seek help and if I want to seek guidance for my mind, I need to go to the creator of my mind. And the creator of my mind, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, has told me, listen, you need to pray 5 times a day to keep that equilibrium. If you don't, there's something that's going to happen to you. You're going to go astray. It's going to be distraction. Inna salat tanha an al-fahsha wal munkar. It is a cause. And this cause that's put in place, this salat that you pray when you wake up in the morning or in dhuhr, in the afternoon or at night, it has an effect. And this effect is vital to your mind. It's vital to your mind. It's very important. When you look at it from that perspective, then you go to shift. Once we want to reverse engineer, let's go to Imam Ali alayhi salam, and you see that is the goal. The goal is we want salat to be our ma'raj al-mu'min. We want our salat not only to stop us from sin, but we want our salat to elevate us to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Okay, so there's two essential goals. When you look at that first idea that we began with, which is hudur al-qalb, or the presence of the heart, and how this presence of the heart in my salat is going to affect that ma'raj and that elevation, we have to take it back to a discussion we had a couple of nights ago. The differentiation in obedience between love and jurisprudence. So Hudur al-qalb, when mentioned from a fiqh perspective, from a jurisprudential perspective, speaks about the intention, right? Your intention has to be for Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Your intention cannot be for your brother or your sister or your father or someone that's walked into the room and or like in the hadith that we know, a stray dog that walks into a mosque and this guy starts to fix his voice up and it turns out to be a stray dog. The intention has to be for Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. But hudur al-qalb that Imam Ali alayhi salam has is a bit different to this. The hudur al-qalb that is required of us, and of course, Sheikh Hamid, I share the same feeling with you that you maybe will taste the sweetness of this hudur a couple of times in our life. This isn't something guaranteed that we should work to and try and achieve this throughout our whole life. Every single day, work towards perfecting the 2 rak'at, of having 2 rak'at of 100% sincere, deep focus on Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and only Allah. But the reality is that most of us do pray, and jurisprudentially we're sweet because our intentions for Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, but our focus is on this dunya. Our focus is on so many things that's going on around us. Our focus is on the daily distractions that happen to us, which is fine, which happens. So the way we combat it is by looking at the mustahabbat that the Ahlul Bayt give us, like the things that the Imams alayhi salam do prior to their salat, in lead up to their salat. They haven't habitualized salah as a action that they do instinctively and just without focus and on autopilot. Salat, they enter the realm of salat and the abode of salat with full focus, 100% focus towards Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. To achieve that, there are steps that they do. There are certain levels of meditation. It's narrated that Imam Sadiq alayhi salam would sit down before his salat for a couple of minutes and just let his thoughts go. Just finish let his thought process clear and prepare himself for God. Imam Ali alayhi salam, through our wudu, when Imam Ali alayhi salam, Sheikh Ali was just mentioning when he changed color, is because he's already anchoring himself and reminding himself who he's going to meet, who he's going to be in front of, who is he going to speak to. So his focus is shifting. He's removing all of the focus of the worldly distractions, and he's just putting it all into one line, which is Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Then you have actions like the adhan, the iqama, which aren't just mustahab because they sound nice. They're mustahab because they allow your soul to prepare itself to enter the spiritual realm of salat. And I feel like I've spoken for a long time, but so there are so many things that we can do, we should be doing, that we should be working on, that little actions, little ways of programming ourselves, programming our mind, programming our spiritual self, that if we really wanted to, we can work on our salah. But Sheikh Ali, I can tell you from now till next year that, man, I really want to pray spiritually and I really want to be closer to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. I really want my salah to be like this and so and so. But if I don't do anything about it, in a sense, I don't take practical action towards facilitating that salat, then it's not going to just miraculously happen. It may happen one day when I have a hardship and I feel like, okay, I have no one but God, and then I'll turn to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, which that's why He's there for us as well. But we have to learn to obey Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, the sarra wa darra, connect to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Those 5 times a day, that meeting we have with God 5 times a day should be our spiritual abode. It should be the abode that we all prepare for every single for our whole life. We're preparing for that perfect 2 rak'at that the Holy Prophet says, that if you pray 2 rak'at perfectly, sincerely, all khalsa, full 100% tawajjuh, hudur qalb, focus, the Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, understanding who you're praying towards, understanding the meaning of what you're doing, then you are promised heaven. Because how can you pray that salat and go astray? Because you've fulfilled the cause, and the effect is tanha al-fahsha wal-munkar. So,
MashaAllah, Shaykhna, MashaAllah.
Fadal, Shaykh, sorry about
that. There's a couple of questions. Let me just hit these questions. First one, which is on the bottom now, actually. How did the Prophet know the structure of Salat? And did he pray before his prophethood? Interesting question. Definitely he prayed, but his prayer was probably not in the form that we have today. So before prophethood, I'm saying. I'm not sure, you guys could correct me here, but my understanding is this, is that elements of the prayer existed. So sajda existed amongst prophets before our Prophet Muhammad, where the prophets would go into sajda, and this was, you know, a form of closeness to Allah and closeness to God way before Islam. But the exact form and the number of prayers and how we perform the prayer in totality, no, that was revealed to the Prophet from Allah, right? And Allah taught the Prophet how to perform the prayer and how to basically teach that to us and all the Muslims who were alive at that time. Feel free to add anything if I'm wrong there. But the next question is for Sheikh Ali. It says, Sheikh Ali mentioned that prayer can be used to strengthen the mind to avoid sin. I would say you also need to have a strong mind to concentrate in salat. I guess, how and where do you start to strengthen the mind would be the question. Good question there.
Very nice.
That's a great question. And I think the question arises when we put the burden so much in salat. I tend to have a different approach when it comes to salat, that yes, we have to make sure it's very spiritual. Yes, we have to make sure that, you know, all our heart and mind is taken by Allah. Yes, we should make sure that the component is love is there. But to be honest, I think these are maqamat, these are ranks for the likes of Imam Ali, for the likes of awliyaullah, the people that have taken the first steps in salat and now are at station 99. They're at station maybe past 99, whatever, how many stations there are. I think the most practical thing we can do with salat is there to strengthen our mind, okay? And the easiest thing anyone can do actually is at the very basic level. It's, you don't have to go to prayer feeling like you love God every time. You don't have to go to prayer feeling like, oh, I miss this so much. Let's be honest, you're not going to miss it sometimes, because it's difficult going to God 5 times a day or 3 times a day, right? In random times. Think about it. Salat, the time of all prayers, changes during the year. Fajr is at 4:30, then it's at 5, then it's at 5:30. Fajr is all right. The world hasn't started. The day hasn't started. Dhuhr changes an hour fluctuation. Maghrib is probably the worst. Sometimes you pray it at 5, sometimes you pray it at 9. It's always random. Okay, what's the philosophy behind that? God is training us to respond to his call whenever we are and however we are. When you hear Allahu Akbar, come and pray. I don't care what you're doing, because during different times of the day, you're going to be doing different things. Whatever you're doing, leave it and come. If you're able to just do that, I'm not saying in salat be, you know, Ayatollah Behjat, where you're crying or, you know, because our hearts are not ready for, or my heart at least is not ready for that. Maybe some of your hearts are able to do that. But when something is so repetitive as salat, please don't be offended for me using that word. It's repetitive. It's going to be sometimes hard on you, but that's the point. The whole point of salat, it's going to be hard. And what you can do, right, to strengthen your mind is to focus on praying salat beautifully. Praying salat beautifully. Pay attention to that for a bit. When you stand up, make sure you pronounce things right. Make sure your Arabic is good. Make sure when you're standing, here's another one for focus. Don't fidget. Don't touch your nose. Don't touch your ears. Don't touch your beard. Don't yawn. You know, half of us are Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. You know, don't. I'm not even getting to your mind yet what you should be thinking about. Focusing on the form of your salat. We have, subhanallah, the literature is full of the mustahabbat of salat just in regards to the form. Even where your eyes should be looking. Look at the turba when you're standing. Look in between your toes when you're doing ruku. Look here. Everything. All got to do with form. Why is that? because that's the first step. The first step is adab salat, having the correct etiquette of salat, in being able to present yourself with respect to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Right now, you might not feel like being a lover and beloved with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Maybe it was just in the middle of your day and you're really busy. God is telling you, leave it, come here for 5 minutes, just practice this form properly. And Sheikh Hamid could build more on this. It just focusing on that idea, which essentially goes back to mindfulness, in strengthening the power of your mind to focus from the basic things. Once you're able to get those basic focus points correct, once you're able to master that, then automatically you might be stepping up gradually into the other phases where now, you know, your salat is having a flavor of love with God. It's a flavor of, you miss salat suddenly, you know, but these things don't build. And I think a lot of people have a difficult time with salat because they find it difficult, and it is difficult. Like, I'm not going to, it's like in the sense that you have to come to it every day and it's the same thing. It's nothing new. You're saying the same stuff, but that's the whole point. That's the whole point of the mindfulness aspect. I think if we make the mindfulness exercise as simple as possible, right? Sheikh Hamid, please then help me on this one. If we make the mindfulness aspect of salat as simple as possible, just the adhkar, the way we say things, the way we do it slowly, we do it nicely. It's a beautiful salat. If someone saw it, they'll be like, this should be an Olympic sport of how beautiful you just did it. It's just a form of art, right? If we're able to just focus on that, I think our minds automatically become more strong. I want you to, Sheikh Ahmed, you know, elaborate more on the mindfulness aspect. I think that's the aspect that strengthens in our mind to then restrain us from sin.
I think when I say hudur qalb, or the presence of the heart, right? Mindfulness is what comes to my mind, right? I think that the way it's being described tonight is a step beyond that, right? So then obviously there's level and degrees of presence of the heart. We'll talk about the lowest level, right? To my understanding, that lowest level would be just being aware of what you're doing when you're doing it, having your mind aware of that. So I think it's beyond the form, right? So the form is something that is important, and observing these rituals and even observing all of these minute details, for instance, where you're looking and where your hand should be, and all of the aspects that are mentioned in our hadith and mentioned in the books of fiqh as mustahabat of the various actions of prayer. I think those could help us as aids to keep our mind focused, but they're not focus of the mind, right? So those two things are different from one another. I do believe,
like the breathing, yeah, they do. Like, I try to sometimes, I don't know if this analogy is correct. You know, when they meditate, they tell you to focus on your breath. Now, your breath is something really, your mind is just focusing on one thing. I was trying to take it into that sort of realm.
Yeah. So obviously with meditation, focusing on the breath is one form of meditation. There's many forms, right? But the focus aspect is what's important. So yes, you can use the form as what you're focusing on, but the form and the focus on the form are two different things, right? Make sense? So I'm looking at the torba while I'm standing, and I'm looking in between my legs while I'm in ruku, and I'm looking downwards when I'm in sajda, and all of this focus of where my eyes are can help me to remain attentive, but it's not remaining attentive by itself. You know what I mean? I could be looking at the torba and thinking about something else, right? So it's a tool that we could utilize, but we have to utilize it correctly.
I just feel like the other one is too hard. Like, if you're fidgeting in salat already, I don't think you're
like, you can't be present if you're fidgeting.
That's what I'm saying. Yeah, like if you can't
I think that it's a good point. Like, I'm not dismissing the point, but what I'm saying is I think that's a step below it. You know what I mean? Like, that's not it. That's not presence of heart. That's a step
Yeah,
before.
yeah, absolutely. That
Yeah.
was my point. Yep.
Yeah. And I think that we should start slow. Like as the question came in, right? It takes a strong mind to concentrate fully in prayer, of course, right? I don't think from, I can't go from not concentrating at all to 100% concentration just like that. No, you have to train yourself, right? And you have to start slow, right? Wudu was mentioned, for instance, right? Even with wudu, like when we're doing the preliminaries of prayer, right? We could start there, right? Like I mentioned to some people that I was working with that if you want to get the benefits of prayer, right, just start with minor levels of concentration. When you're doing wudu, just feel, how often do you feel the water in your hand? How often do you, like normally when I'm doing wudu, it's just as quickly as possible. I don't know what happened. I'm a little wet. Now I dry myself and there we go. Let's pray. You know what I mean? Like who's concentrating on what you're doing during that time, right? Take 1 second and just feel the water touch your hand before you wash your face. Try it. It can't hurt. It's not going to hurt you to try that. Try it. Just take that 1 second. See it, right?
And then as you do that, think about like the words of Imam Ali alayhi salam, where he's got certain mustahabbat for every action. Like
those
just that
mustahabbat will
thought
come.
process.
Those will come. Before that, before we reach that level, just because even with the mustahabbat, like we can add so much mustahabbat to our prayer and not have hudur account. You know what I mean? We could be doing all of these mustahab actions ritualistically, and I'm not saying they'll be devoid of effect, but the effect won't be as great as it could. Right? But take standing and facing the Qibla, for instance. You mentioned how the color and the physical appearance of the imams would change when they stand and face the Qibla, or they would shake. People would notice a difference, right? And obviously we're not there, and I'm not expecting any of us to be anywhere near that. No. But when you stand up and face the Qibla, take that 1 second, just a second, like no longer than that. I'm not saying have this 30-minute contemplation about God. Just take a second. I'm about to pray. I'm speaking to Allah, right? Just focus what it is you're doing. And then as it grows within you and you're able to focus on what you're doing, then maybe that focus turns into, as you were saying, the higher levels of presence of heart, where you're contemplating Allah's mercy and Allah's, grandness and all of the amazing characteristics of Allah. It's not going to happen at the beginning. At the beginning, I feel it's all about focus. Sheikhna, give me a second. Let me just address a couple questions. I don't even know what they are, but I was told the questions exist. All right. So here's a question for you. When praying, is it right to make gestures like play out instead of just recite?
Sorry, is it right? Sorry, gestures?
Yeah, I'm not sure exactly what that means. When praying, is it right to make gestures like play out instead of just recite? I think it's like, can you move your hands as a gesture as you're reciting, maybe? Is that what is being asked, do you think? I don't know. Maybe if we could get a clarification on that, maybe. I'm not sure exactly what that means. So I'm going to move to a different one, and then inshallah, we can go back to that. All right. Can you please briefly explain sajda to sahu? Hope I pronounced it correctly. Inshallah, I pronounced it correctly. Go ahead.
Yeah, so sajda sahu is, it's when you've forgotten something big in your salah, so a rukun or a juzu in your salah, or you've made a mistake and you have rak'atain shak or rak'at shak, depending on the which rak'ah you've made a mistake in, so between fourth and fifth and whatnot. Sajda sahu is the two sajdat you do after salat, after you've completed your salah, and you do a small little dua. There's a narration that says you can recite the dua Bismillah wallah Assalamu alaikum ya Rasulullah wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh in both of the sajdat. And after the second sajda, correct me if I'm wrong, Sheikhna, maybe there's an addition to it.
Yeah, the Maraja have like difference of opinion what could be said in the as
Yeah.
the dhikr. Yeah. So
Yeah,
just
so yeah,
they
just
have to look
check
up.
your marja. Yeah.
Yeah.
And after the second sajda, you do tashahud and taslim, and you do the niyyah. The niyyah and your intention for this sajda has to be specific to something that you have forgotten, or maybe an overthought. Maybe you felt like you were praying and you lost your focus, and you lost, you were thinking about something else, and you finished your salah. So it's like a sort of recompense. But before we continue, Shaykhna, if I can just make a few points. I was just reading the question. So in regards to these little actions, so I totally agree with both Sheikh Hamid and Sheikh Ali on the fact that, the goal is to try and reap as much as we can from the salah. But realistically, there's so much to do before we can get to that. Some would say working on your mindfulness, working on, perfecting those little actions and those little etiquettes within salah. Totally agreed. The point I was trying to make, and I just want to repeat it just because I feel like this, I wasn't taught this way growing up. Like I always had a different perspective on these little actions that are mustahab. When we hear things that are mustahab in your salah or before your salah or in your wudu or in general, it's very important to understand what is mustahab. What does it mean? Like, what does an mustahab action mean? So when Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says a mustahab action is an action that's a hukum from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So it's not something random, it's a hukum from God. So when there's certain actions that are mustahab to do, for example, certain little, reciting certain little dua whilst you're doing wudu. I'm not saying everyone's going to do it, or if you do it, you're going to feel a certain level of spirituality that you can't compare to. But these little actions will help you try and reach that salah that you want to reach. So, that couple of minutes of mindfulness and thinking about, 2 or 3 things that you're grateful for from God before your salah. I'm not saying that you want to pray the deepest salah and connect spiritually to God, but it will be a form of a guide. These actions, these little 1-2 minute actions, are what allow you to facilitate the environment for you to build off your salah. And I think that's very important, that we don't wait to become spiritual to do mustahabbat. We do mustahabbat, and through these little actions we become spiritual. You know what I mean? And I feel like it's very important to make that distinction, that when you approach them with that manner, approach them that, all right, God's the most wise, he's told me there's reasons why all of these actions are very beneficial for me, then there's definitely something to reap from him. Sheikhna, I think there's still one more question.
There's a couple questions actually. So there's a clarification of the gesture question, which is good. So what was meant is it okay in prayer to speak like you're talking to someone with, something just popped up on my screen, to speak like you're talking to someone with expression and different tone? Ali.
Yeah, so I actually read this fatwa from Sayyid Sistani. So the idea is like when a mother is speaking and its infant is going towards the stove, and then it just says Allahu Akbar, like it wants to scare the infant away from the stove. And I can't find the fatwa now, but I read it was really nice. The question was, does this break our salat? And then she's like, no, it does not. She's doing this qurbatan ilallah, like what she's doing does not break her salat. But I forgot the wording. It was very nice. Sayyid essentially said she's doing this ibadatan. She's doing this out of worship, and it does not break her it does not break her thing. Hopefully,
that's for saving her kid. I'm sure there's examples that wouldn't be worshiping that. But if that's what's meant, if what's meant is speaking to Allah with different tone and different tonation in one's voice when they're speaking, right, then that would obviously be okay, right? But if you're right, like I didn't even think about it in that way, but that's an interesting take, where if what's meant is, I'm changing my tone of voice during prayer in order to make someone aware of something.
Warn someone,
yeah. So if it's warning someone, if it's like telling someone, oh, look at the TV, something just amazing just happened on TV, go look at that, then maybe that's probably
pushing it.
But that's an interesting one. Excellent. All right, another question. Assalamu alaikum, brothers. I just had a quick question about praying. If you have missed many prayers in the past, how can we make up for them? So this one, definitely a lot of people fall into this situation where they might have become religious later on in life, or even sometimes maybe, you know, they were performing their prayer wrongly, or they're doing something incorrectly, which kind of makes them have to make up a whole bunch of prayers. So there's a number of reasons why someone could be in that situation, but people do find themselves there. Now, my understanding is, yes, we have to make up the prayers, but you don't have to make all of them up immediately, right? So if you have 5 years of prayer, you don't have to pray for, 19 days straight without drinking a cup of water, right? What you would do is you would make a plan that is possible to do. So for instance, I know a lot of people who are in that situation, they'll double up their prayers. So after Fajr, they'll pray another Fajr. After Dhuhr and Asr, they'll pray another Dhuhr and Asr. And they do it that way, if that's possible. If that's not possible for someone, less than that. If someone could do more than that, whatever the case is, you make a plan and you try your best to stick to that plan. And then if you die before you've made them all up, inshallah, Allah will forgive the rest. But you still have to have a will, and inshallah, people will do it for you after your death. But it's, if it's not possible, if it's one prayer, two prayers, pray, just make it up as quickly as you can. But if it's so many like that, you have a plan and you stick to that plan. Have you guys heard similar to that?
Another common question in that regard is, I don't know how long I've missed. Is it 3 years, is it 4 years, or 5 years? Then you just approximate what you feel is a confident number that is definitely what you miss, and you do qada on those, inshallah.
That sounds good. Another question. An opinion. The adhan can be an amazing tool to both remind us of prayer and also put us in the right mindset for prayer. So a phone reminder is great. Also, understanding the words being recited throughout the prayer can help us apply ourselves in the situation we are in, which is speaking to God. Thoughts? So I know you mentioned the adhan, Sheikh Mohammed, the iqamah and the adhan as being indicators, and that prayers come in, and also tools that we could use to get us in the kind of in the mode and in the zone for praying. And that's definitely I think reiterated here in this question. The only difference is that he mentioned that the phone reminder. So I guess that means having the adhan on the phone, and the phone recites the adhan when the time of prayer comes in, which is beautiful. I love those apps, which are great. And also knowing what one is saying. What do you think about that? Like, I think that's important as well.
Yeah. So on that, I think, the fact that they mentioned the phone thing, what I like about that is a step in facilitating that reminder or that environment for mindfulness. So like, Sheikhna, we're talking about being mindful earlier, and letting salat be a means to that. When you're making sure that your environment facilitates for you to remember salat and uphold salat. Like I remember in Lebanon, when we were living in Lebanon, the most beautiful thing that we can ever experience, something that we really miss out on in the West, is when salat time will come, adhan is going off, and you remember through in Qom, you're hearing adhan everywhere you go. If you're going into a shop, if it's salat time, everyone knows it's the time of God. And it just, number one, it makes you prepare and spiritually gather yourself and just want to go to the mosque or just prepare to pray. But also it makes you feel bad and shows you a bit of accountability. Like, hey, what am I going to do now? I'm going to continue playing my game, or I'm going to continue wasting time, or I'm going to continue on my shisha or argile, and there's the adhan going off. So definitely having reminders like that, setting plans in motion for you to always remember. And 100%, like understanding who you're praying towards, and understanding what you're saying in your salat, and speaking from your heart to God, as I think, that will definitely elevate your hopefully may Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala let us taste the sweetness of a salah that's been elevated to that level, where we actually know who we're praying towards and what we're saying.
SubhanAllah, with the nur that radiates from both of your foreheads, I think you're just playing with us here. Of course, you guys expect.
Yeah, I'm just
Ali,
playing with
what
the
do you,
lighting.
It's you know, humility is one of those characteristics that really really comes with spiritual success. And with you two brothers, I see it, you know, you ooze humility.
Yeah, mine is just the headlamp I've bought from IKEA, so I don't know what you're talking about.
Yeah, and yeah, mine got that came out.
As I more practical example, my point, you just keep on nailing my point in. Thank you. Sheikh Ali, I guess, do we have any thoughts before we close?
Yeah, I just so we can link it back to the story of Karbala. We know that Imam Hussein salamullahi alayhi put 2 guards to protect the salat, right? And like, you know, my taste is to always bring the Quran into Karbala. So Imam Hussein put 2 guards to protect his salat. And we have a verse in the Quran that says, it's in description of the muttaqeen, and he says, وَهُمْ عَنْ, or is it the mu'mineen? I think it's in Surah Mu'minun. وَهُمْ عَنْ صَلَاتِهِمْ حَافِظُونَ. An ibara that's close to this, if I have not made a mistake, that they are, the believers are protective of their salat. We have another expression in the Quran, هُمْ فِي صَلَاتِهِمْ دَائِمُونَ. They are constant with their salat. So as you can see, the Quran has talked about both the aspect of quantity, that we always need to be frequent with our salat, have a habit of praying, make sure it's always happening, because unfortunately sometimes people, some of us, including myself, would be like, oh, I'm just going to pray when I feel like it, right? When I have the greatest state of mind. And they might miss a prayer too here because I'm not feeling very spiritual. I have done something that's not letting me confront Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, so on and so forth. But the verse says, وَهُمْ فِي صَلَاتِهِمْ دَائِمُونَ. Da'im means something that's consistent, persistently happening. So that's one aspect. And we see that in the story of Abu Abdullah al-Hussein. Even in the middle of battle, he is keeping the dawam, the persistence of his salat active. And finally, he's protecting his salat. I want to just use a metaphor that we should also be protecting our salat. And this whole discussion was ways of protecting the quality of our salat. So if there was the idea of the quantity, then there's also the idea of the quality of salat. Inshallah, we can be inspired from the story of Imam Hussein in all of its aspects.
One more question. It just came up as you were closing. They say the Kesha prayers.
I think it's Qadha prayers.
Qadha? I don't think it's Qadha prayers.
Yeah, because it says we make on Laylatul Qadr.
It's worth 1,000 prayers.
Yeah,
is that the 100 rak'ah prayer?
Yeah, they want to do some quick maths,
right? Would make up for missed prayers of the past. Yeah, it's a good try, but no, you have to make up one for one.
as it's 1,000 mustahab prayers, but not 1,000 obligatory prayers. So that's where there's the clarification of the hadith.
And if it is that 100 rakat prayer, that 100 rakat prayer is actually 52 rakat mustahab prayers. So a lot of times in centers here in Sydney, we perform, or I haven't done it, but maybe you guys perform 100 rakat of qadha prayers, right? So I think that's like 17 days or however many days it is that they make up to make it close to 100 rakat. That's different than that 100 rakat prayer, which is mustahab on Laylatul Qadr. Not saying that it's a bad thing, it's a great thing to do. Inshallah, keep it up, and it's a beautiful what's it called? Sunnah, what's it called? Bid'ah Hasana, right? It's a good one that came up, but it's not that one that's mentioned in some of our books. Then there's a comment that says, thank you for answering our questions. Assalamu alaikum, wa alaikum salam. All right, thank you, brothers. Inshallah, we'll pass it on to was that Ali? Do you have anything?
No, I was saying thank you for your presence and your humility and your knowledge.
Thank you, Sheikhna.
Inshallah, let's pass it on. Don't make me blush now. Let's pass on to Sheikh Nahaini, inshallah, and he can, inshallah, lead us into the misal, inshallah.
صلى الله عليك يا مولاي يا رسول الله. صلى الله عليك أيها البشير النذير السراج المنير. السلام عليك وعلى ابنك المظلوم الشهيد العطشان الظمآن حسين يا حسين حسينا وحسينا وحسينا غريبا وغريبا وغريبا تركت الخلق ثرا في هواك لسان حال سيدي مولاي أبا عبد الله الحسين وأيتمت العيال لكي أراك فلا قطعتني في الحب إربا فلا قطعتني في الحب إربا يا الله لما مال الفؤاد إلى سواك حسين لقد ضيعت الناس معناك حسينا وحسينا وحسينا يوم العاشر من المحرم نظر سيدي ومولاي أبا عبد الله الحسين إلى أخته زينب يا زينب where is my son Abdullah يا زينب عبد الله يا حبيبي where are you Abdullah the time has come for you I asked and pledged the man to give water so I can quench your thirst حبيبي عبد الله وإذا باللعين حرملا يرميه برمحه وإذا بلعين يرميه برمحه وقد ضاع حقه هل ممكن لبشر يقطع نحره. هل يمكن لبشر يقطع نحره والنحر قد أنزف دماؤه؟ The three-headed arrow left its place and buried a new hope in the neck of His Grace Abdullah. حسينا وحسينا وحسينا غريبا وغريبا وغريبا.
صلى الله عليك يا رسول الله. صلى الله عليكم يا أهل بيت النبوة وموضع الرسالة ومختلف الملائكة ومهبط الوحي ومعدن الرحمن وخزان العلم ومنتهى الحلم. صلى الله عليك يا أبا عبد الله. صلى الله عليك أيها المظلوم. صلى الله عليك أيها الشهيد بكربلاء عطشانا. May Allah's peace and blessings be upon you, our dear Imam al-Hussein, our dear oppressed Imam who was slaughtered by the shores of the Furat, whilst his mouth was dry from thirst. On the day of Ashura, there came a time when Imam al-Hussein had already responded to all the final dying calls of his army. He responded to the call of Habib and Zuhair and Muslim. Imam had already cried out, Al-an inkasara dhahri, when he saw Abu al-Fadl al-Abbas on the ground. Imam alayhi salam had already fallen over the cut and mutilated body of his Ali al-Akbar. Now our dear Imam, our master, is standing all alone on the plains of Karbala. Imam alayhi salam looks around and cries out, هل من ناصر ينصرني هل من ذاب يذب عن حرم رسول الله. Is there anyone to come to my help? Is there anyone to protect the sanctity of Rasulullah? At this stage, Imam al-Hussein alayhi salam hears the crying of his 6-month-old Ali al-Asghar or Abdullah al-Radi. It is as if the young baby is telling his father, "Don't go to the battlefield without me. Oh father, how dare these people do this to you?" Rabab, the mother of the infant, requests Imam al-Hussein to try and get some water for her thirsty child. Because her milk had dried out, and because of her thirst, she couldn't feed the baby any longer. I'm not sure what's going through Rabab's heart at the moment, but perhaps she's thinking that only if my baby can get a little water, he'd be able to fall asleep and rest. Imam alayhi salam carries Ali al-Asghar, covers him with his aba, just so the sun's rays do not hurt the child. Imam proceeds to the enemies. He shows the little baby to the enemies and says, "Ama tarawna kayfa yataladda atasha." Don't you see how thirsty this baby is? يا قوم إن لم ترحموني فارحموا هذا الطفل. If you don't show mercy to me, if you can't show any mercy to me, then at least show mercy to this child. إن كان للرجال ذنب فما لهذا الصغير. Look how innocent this child is. At this moment, it is said that even the hard-hearted enemies started disputing amongst each other. Umar ibn Sa'ad sees this commotion in his army. He shouts to Harmala, his most accurate archer. He says to Harmala, "Cut this discussion. Finish this child off. Harmala, can't you see the brightness of the infant's neck?" Harmala prepares his arrow. Harmala shoots his arrow. The arrow hits the target. As soon as Ali al-Asghar feels the heat of the arrow, فَتَحَ عَيْنَيْهِ فِي وَجْهِ أَبِيهِ. He opens his eyes to his father. وَصَارَ يُرَفْرِفُ كَالطَّيْرِ الْمَذْبُوحِ. Ali al-Asghar starts flapping like a bird that's slaughtered. Imam Hussein alayhi salam collects the blood of his baby and throws it to the sky, saying, "هون علي ما نزل بي فإنه بعين الله." This musibah that has befallen on me feels easier, Ya Allah, because I know, Ya Allah, you are watching me. Now how would Imam alayhi salam face the mother of this child? How would Imam al-Hussein face Rabab? She had asked for just a little water. على لعنة الله على القوم الظالمين وسيعلم الذين ظلموا أي منقلب ينقلبون.
La'natullah ala qawm al-zalimin. Thank you very much, Brother Abbas and Sheikh Muhammad Dahini, for the heartfelt masa'ib. And thank you very much to all three shuyukh for conducting yet another engaging discussion tonight. I'd just like to make a quick point that Sheikh Ali Safdari's reassuring tone, of course, does not mean, or he does not mean in any way to downplay what's going on or anyone's sufferings at all. Just shedding some light based on news that's coming out. That's it for tonight's program. If you'd like to give us any feedback, please stay on Vivox and use the tab on the top right-hand side of your screen. Stay safe, everyone. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullah.